So welcome to the three panelists, and we'll get started. So in my introduction, I mentioned how it is the least sexy part of all of the stuff that we're doing, but it is really, really important. Those of you who were here yesterday heard Annette Verschuren talk about how Canada ranks 34th out of 35 in terms of getting a permit. We do lots of other stuff really, really well. Environment, a lot of the societal things that we do, but it is still a problem when you can't get stuff done. We heard Steve Williams talk about all of the really great things that Suncor is doing. Obviously Shell, a lot of companies are doing really great things, but sometimes, you hear stories of, well, it took 3 years, 4 years to implement something that was capable of reducing our GHG emissions by 20%. Well, we need to get better at that. But there are a lot of other factors. How do we influence decision makers in terms of the policy making that they do? For example, so we split this up into three. This part I'm going to read. So the first part is going to be policy or ineffective policy as a hindrance. Cody's going to tackle that. The next one is policy disruption that is needed to actually open doors. Mary's going to tackle that. And then the third piece is going to be policy and social movement. How do we use policy to actually move forward? So one is, how is it holding us back? Second is, how do we actually get it to get out of the way, open some doors? And then the third, how can we actively use policy and our decision-making capacity to encourage activities? So the ineffective policy is hindrance. It's no surprise to anybody here. We're having a lot of trouble in Canada getting stuff done, getting things built. But it's not just pipelines. We have trouble getting wind farms built. We have trouble getting transmission lines built. If we're really to capitalize on the incredible benefits and of the resources that we have, we need to actually get better at recognizing the need for health, security, all of the things that we need regulation for, but we also need to make sure that we otherwise get out of the way a little bit. So I'm turning it over to Cody.
Thank you very much, Martha. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. It's an amazing conference, and Canada has a tremendous opportunity to disrupt existing energy flows around the world, existing trade of oil and natural gas. And all of our resources. We are a world leader in protecting people and the planet. We do have an abundance of natural resources from coast to coast. In recent years, we've been ranked top 10 in the world for wind capacity. We're top for installed hydro capacity. We've been ranked a leader in clean technology and clean investment in recent years, even ranking ahead of India. So we have this opportunity to help meet the world's growing demand for oil and gas and electricity and resources, aquaculture, agriculture, beef, wood products, coal, mining products, you name it. And unfortunately, we've seen a conversation that has not been based on a big picture, nuanced worldview. And this is pretty unique to Canada. We can't seem to get any infrastructure built, while in the rest of the world, they have no problem. So, we have this opportunity. We need to all recognize that, unfortunately, policymakers and some of our elected officials have been manipulated by a very narrow view of the world, and that campaign to sort of landlock and keep our oil and gas landlocked, which is our largest export. We produce some of the cleanest, greenest oil and gas on Earth, and with the highest standards of, again, protecting people, protecting the planet, environmental innovation and collaboration. And it's so important that we are taking a big picture, nuanced view of how the world functions and how the world works, because we can actually help contribute to protecting the environment globally from a macro basis. Every barrel that comes from Canada, if we can grow our market share, there's an immense benefit to all Canadians and our social services and our quality of life, but there's also a benefit for other countries around the world if they can source barrels and source gas from a country like Canada that's a democratic, a friendly supplier with an ongoing commitment to being socially progressive and environmentally progressive. So I think it's just really important that when we look at a lot of the decisions that have happened and all of the pipeline projects that have been obstructed and delayed, LNG projects, and again, wind farms and getting hydroelectricity transmission lines built. These projects are helping to meet demand. It's not that there's no demand. The world wants more Canadian energy. We are a leader, again, in all of those previous metrics that I mentioned, and it's a tremendous opportunity for us going forward, I think, just as private citizens and for industry to really change the culture. We have to be proactive to defend ourselves, to make sure that the facts are being told. The entire Canadian oil and gas industry does not look like an oil sands mine, and we have to just be standing up for the facts around what we do and how we do it. Truly, if you look at the definition of clean technology, that is being driven in a large part by the oil and gas sector, which is, again, Canada's largest export, incredibly important to our quality of life and helping meet growing global demand. I will end with, the world needs about 3.1 million barrels a day of new production just to stand still and meet existing demand due to depletion. Canada has an opportunity to increase our market share, displace oil that's coming into North America and coming into other parts of the world, and gas from countries with inferior standards with no carbon regs. We're still the only top supplier of oil to the US with carbon regs, top major supplier since 2007. So it's such a good news story, and that is not always being heard or seen in the media or heard or seen amongst policymakers, because there's been a real concerted effort to smear and to sort of demarket our resources. But we need to just stand up for ourselves, I think, and make sure that we're having these policy decisions based on a big picture, nuanced view.
Great, thanks, Cody. So, Mary, policy and policy disruption needed to open doors. So here, although there is obviously a lot of technological process and invention, too many aspects of the regulatory system create barriers to adoption and implementation. What are your thoughts about how we actually move our policy and then subsequently our actual regulatory environment to open doors as opposed to create some of the barriers that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I want to, first of all, build on what Cody has said, and I just have to say, and I said this last night, that there's not a better place to have the meeting of the minds of where disruption will take place, because we have a long history of disrupting the energy industry. And, we have a proven track record of ingenuity and perseverance, regardless of, political policies, macro trends, macroeconomic trends, regulation, and those types of things. We always find a workaround, a creative workaround, and we tend to just persevere. So, we are the people that figured out how to go 3 kilometers down, 5 kilometers across, hit a bathtub-sized target, and extract very difficult product out of a very difficult geology and deliver it to the world, although it's on the slow train. So, and I would just say what worries me about everything that Cody is talking about and about the things that we're hearing, this emotional and political conversation that's happening today about the energy industry is that this is what I would call investment purgatory. And it is having a huge, huge impact on everything we do. I'm not sector specific, I'm sector agnostic. I care about diversification of this city within the energy industry and to all those other industries that we work in, whether that be agriculture, transportation and logistics, health and life sciences. And by the way, all of those industries are improving people's quality of life, and we should start changing the narrative of what business we're in, because nobody cares about pipelines or the process or the product. They care about, that they can live the quality of life and wear running shoes and wear lipstick and wear cream and fleeces and, and potentially fly to Palm Springs, right? So we're not just in the business of transportation fuel, we're in the business of life. So we need to change the narrative, and, we're trying to do our part. But anyway, back to the question you asked me. Never give her a microphone.
That's why we get her to do this thing.
The thing that worries me, and I think will have the more lasting impact on our competitiveness, is our ability to embrace innovation. And you think about us, we are so good at the below-the-ground technology and innovation, but we have this tsunami of innovation coming towards us, which is called Industry 4.0, or the Industrial Revolution, which makes every other industrial revolution look linear, so steam, energy, IT and automation compared to virtual, digital, and physical technologies coming towards all of our industrial sectors at the same time. And we barely know in Calgary how to deal with one, not to mention multiple. So whether it be artificial intelligence, AR, VR, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, cybersecurity, blockchain, it's all coming to us. And it's gonna, you know, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, they are all talking about the industrial sectors being 80 to 90% of their business in the future. Like, it was fun working on Facebook and Tinder, but those days are over for those companies. They're looking at the industrial sectors. Oh my gosh, Calgary is an industrial economy. And we have head offices here, which are clients that need those technologies. And we have unlocked capital here in the market that are used to investing in the below the ground innovation, the whole, and not the above the ground innovation. And so we have to create policies that round out our talent pool, because bad news for us is we've got a lot of engineers. We have only 25% of our STEM workers here in Calgary are software engineers, data scientists, coders, and programmers, all required for the Industrial Revolution 4.0. Compared to other cities, of 50 to 63% of their STEM talent are software engineers, data scientists, coders, and programmers. So policy, we need policy to build the pipeline of talent pool and round out our talent pool for the new economy. And if we don't, we won't survive. We will not deliver energy, you know, safe energy or clean energy, safe food. We won't be able to move people around easily, and we won't be able to provide good health. And if we don't embrace policy for innovation and investment in innovation and rounding out our talent pool, then that will have a much more lasting impact on our economy than any other policy.
Terrific, thank you. So Sandip, how do we implement, how do we develop policies that can actually encourage social movement? So I think, you know, it ties in a lot with what Cody was talking about, just in terms of education. There's so much misinformation out there, and unfortunately too many policy decision makers are making decisions based on a lack of information, or worse, misinformation. But there are opportunities to actually use policy to change what we're doing in terms of social movement. So over to you, Sandy.
Thanks, Martha. So actually, one of the big things we have here, obviously, is that in an international marketplace, which is what energy is, so stop thinking about it as small, and I don't think we do, but we do tell ourselves that, and we tell ourselves that in the media. We don't do a good job of taking and owning and being in that international marketplace in energy. So yeah, we have the world's best energy here. We don't tell people that. Whatever we've been saying, they're not listening. So we've let people in with that social movement with 140 characters define who we are. And that's what is required, is a social movement for energy innovation. And I don't mean the 140 characters, I mean educating ourselves as citizens. And that's on us as an industry in energy to do that, because we are just getting misinformation, or we're getting tidbits, but we're not doing it in a way that's moving anything forward. So think about it from a perspective of, okay, this is great for the environment, X, Y, Z, but what does that mean in the international marketplace? So one of the things that policymakers can do, and if there are any policymakers in the room or someone can influence the policy, there's a few key things that can be done around that social movement, because what we're trying to debunk right now is the fact that politics are defining policy. So if politics are defining policy, then the policymakers themselves, the great thinkers themselves that got us here, are out of the way. They're putting out to pasture that doesn't really, your voice doesn't matter anymore. Well, that's not the case. So we need to help them back in. So things that we need to do is look at policies around innovation. So innovation policy has to outpace the energy. It has to be a pull strategy to policy, not, okay, yeah, this company's doing this, what's my reactive policy to that? Oh, hang on, let me put a barrier up so they can stop the innovation so I can catch up on my policy. That's backwards. They're gonna go somewhere else that's saying, hey, come here, because we will figure out the policy with you, but we like the idea, we like the ingenuity. So the policymakers in Canada need to get to that point where they're pulling innovation and not just throwing money at things, making things easier for investment to flow in. Investment to flow into intangible economies that are going to enable and innovate these asset-based economies, which energy has been. Energy has been an asset-based economy, and we're trying to figure out how to invest in that intangible economy. And that is going to come from the policymakers and how they can pull. The other bit of the social movement that can happen is the legislators need to start to use voice and language better. They need to use language that is business language that we all understand and how we think, instead of this double speak. Like, I mean, we can use examples of today, or we can use examples of Trans Mountain. That's going to go down as a classic example of how we got it wrong and how we closed our borders. Because it transcends just the energy sector. Just the energy sector is taking it on the chin yet again around trying to be innovative and also get our resources out. But the problem that comes in with those conversations is, what is the language? The language isn't optimistic at all. The language isn't setting us up for success. It's saying, oh, hang on a minute, there might be some political risk in Canada. How is that even possible? Where did Canada get to that we've increased our level of political risk? Just because we're scared and we don't have the courage and conviction to use the language that's required to have some strength in our voice and own our position. We are an international player in any commodity that we do. So why are we giving up our voice? One of the calls to action I would have for the policymakers is leveling the competitiveness. One key thing that can be done right now is look at a policy that puts the same amount of rigor on what we export and what we import. Because if you do that, you actually help the environment. Because when you're bringing in oil from Venezuela or Saudi Arabia, you ain't helping the environment. That is something a Canadian policymaker could do within the next 2 sittings and get that through and help the industry. That is the type of social movement I'm talking about.
Thank you. One of the comments you made that, unfortunately, too often it's politics that's making policy. In my world, we call that decision-making evidence. Decision-based evidence-making, as opposed to what we would prefer to see, which is evidence-based decision-making. And unfortunately, there's not enough of the latter and too much of the former. And of course, you know that well. That's what Cody does. Open this up to the three of you to talk about what you just heard from the others, and anything to add, anything to elaborate on?
Excuse me. Yeah, I would just add, I think that, you look at Energy East as one example. So our country has spent more than $115 billion on imported oil, often at world prices, from countries that have deplorable records for protecting the environment, for carbon regulations. They don't come anywhere near competing with Canada on wind, on clean tech, on hydro, et cetera. And yet we were not having that conversation around that infrastructure project. And so, and unfortunately, that project got canceled. I agree completely that if we're going to have certain regulations and policy on our exports, we should also be looking at having the same policy on our imports, because that would really level the playing field. We have seen certain regulations now on certain industries. The reality is, everything we're wearing, everything we've ever done, everything in this room comes from the earth. And Canada should be the last producer out of the pool as long as that resource is required, because of our standards, because of our pride and our progressiveness in protecting people and protecting the planet. We truly are world leaders, and we truly should be proud of that. So I think if you're going to take a policy and say, well, this is on a pipeline, why is it not also on other industries that also are producing emissions and also do have an environmental impact? We need to really get back to balance here and understand it's not east versus west, it's not wind versus solar, it's not oil versus solar and wind versus gas and us versus them. We're all in this together as Canadians, and our resources have a positive force, exert a positive force on protecting the global environment.
I'd like to add to that, because
Yes.
I'd like to add to that, and we had a really good discussion at one of the dinners where some of the guests of Energy Disruptors attended last night, and of course, nobody likes to have the marketer in the room, and there was one marketer and a whole bunch of armchair marketers. So you have to ask yourself about what is the cause? Why are we on our back foot defending ourselves? Is it because of policy? Nope. It's because the energy industry went into consumer marketing and didn't realize it. And the only strength that every single person that was attacking the energy industry had was communications and marketing. And the only skill that we don't have is communications and marketing. And so I'm a lifetime marketer. I'm a lifetime consumer marketer. And I always say to people, what are we trying to sell people? We typically sell them the things that are self-serving. We are the economic engine for the country. Well, you know what? Paula, the hairdresser in Welland, does not care. She does not care. And then we go, but look at us. What about our transfer payments? We help build schools and hospitals. Paula, the hairdresser in Welland, who's never been to the hospital, maybe never even went to school, does not care. But what she does care is she can get rollers, she can use a curling iron, she can put gel in somebody's hair, and she can use her ATM with her plastic credit card or ATM card, whatever that's called. What's that called? Debit card, thank you. Obviously, I don't get paid enough. And so this is where I keep talking about these industrial sectors that we keep talking about. We sell people on a process or a pipeline or a product. You think about this company, Apple. They have never told you about the components of this. They have never told, except for the advantages of it. They sell you the benefit of the business they're in. They are in the benefit of making your life more convenient and more connected. Nike, if we knew what was in Nike products, we would not wear waffle running shoes, and we would not wear Lycra shorts, and we would probably not work out, right? But they sold you on an active lifestyle. And so why are we not selling people on the business we're in, whether it be energy, agriculture, and I mean all things energy, oil and gas, wind, solar, because wind and solar will be on its back leg defending itself as well soon. You know, agriculture, transportation and logistics, and health. Those are the industries we are in this province and in this city. And so why don't we sell them? And we are in the business of improving people's quality of life, in delivering products that is the highest demand for human needs. That's the business we're in. There's not one energy company in the top 50 trusted brands in the world, but every single car company is. Where do the emissions come from? They come from the cars, because they have sold people that they will transport people safely or chicks will look at you, right? And I would just say that we don't do a very, very good job of that. And so Marlboro cigarettes is the number 26 trusted brand in the world. And so if we can't get Exxon, or Exxon kind of bumps in 49 to 50, but if we can't get the energy industries in, because they are in the business of delivering quality of life.
Or Shell, or Suncor, or companies that are clearly working really hard to do things well.
Yeah. So we have, it's not just the government that has to, you know, has to deliver on the policy part of it. It's also the industry that has to deliver on the messaging. Sandip, did you want to?
Yeah, so here's a clear example of what's happened with the lack of communication. So we all are obviously quite aware of what happens in the US. So between 2010 and 2015, about 10 times worth of Keystone pipeline, that length of the pipe, went into the United States in those 5 years. At the same time, we were told we can't cross the border. Why was that? Why did we let other politics come into our country? Because we didn't have the marketing and communications, we didn't have the policy, but we also didn't have the backs of the government, right? And so all those three things working together is the way to change that narrative and change that message. How are they able to put a bunch of pipe down and become leaders yet again, and yet we can't do any of that, and we're the ones that have it. And we're the ones that are, say, on the top of the list for environmental. So if policy isn't going to go down there and have that piece around the communications, that's because policy is not interconnected. So you need to interconnect the policies as well. You can't have one policy that says, hey, we have free trade, and another policy says, yeah, but we can't tell anybody about it, or we can't do this, or, oh yeah, that's good, but this isn't good. That cherry-picking approach to policy that the politicians and government have been able to do is also limiting the ability of us being able to communicate effectively. Every industry, not just energy, is good at talking to themselves. But we don't need to be, we need to be on that other piece of owning it and then really being in the marketplace and talking to the business owners, because it's business to business, it's never going to be government. Government can always, and it always has, helped through energy. But even in the national interest conversation, we can't get on the same page as Canadians. And why can't we get on the same page? Because we're not choosing to educate ourselves as Canadians on the benefits of the lifestyle that energy provides, or on the fact of transfer payments, those other things. We're yelling at people. When you get yelled at, nobody listens. So even the policymakers are waiting it out. I'm sure there's some energy companies here waiting it out. That's not the right approach, and you know that it's not the right approach. You know that the approach is to get the conversation to a point where people listen. That's the only way business works. You set your strategy, you put your education and your communication into your execution. So if we do that in our businesses, why are we not doing that as a collective industry? And I mean as a global industry, right? Why is it okay for Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and others? I'm going to pick on them just because I have personal
come on. Women can drive in Saudi Arabia now. Like, progress is progress.
Progress is fine. It's coming from personal experience in those ones, but it's just because the hypocrisy of it all, we keep calling it those things, but we never actually get to the level of the playing field where it's like, I'm going to make a choice as a consumer, I'm going to make a choice as a company. Imagine these companies that now are, divesting out of oil and gas assets. Well, where's the ramification for that? Because there's something to be said about the fact that that can happen, and there's a trickle effect to the people just believing in that. That's the whole piece of the social movement. We're not taking the time to listen and learn, and learning from opposites. So why is it working in the US that they can tout out all of those environmental standards, yet lay down that much pipe and increase their production and be a player? What is that in the psyche that we're missing? Because we are getting influenced by US media as well, international media, but we can't even get the story right within Canada. Even as, like last night, there's some articles coming out about Alberta needs to stop complaining. It's not an Alberta conversation, it's an international conversation, and it's a Canadian conversation. But the people in this room, in this city, need to own that conversation back.
Yeah, I think we always get confused about cause and effect. I want to go back to this because I hear you, what you're saying, but so I am still on the page of why is this happening? Because people don't understand, they don't make a connection between energy and quality of life. If we want to remove petroleum products, we'll put people back to 1920 and they can ride around on moose bare naked, right? They can do that. But the reality is that politicians can't stand up and defend it because they're not experts in it. We can't expect them to be experts in it. So let's make it easy for them. So it goes back to this whole thing about, is it the policy that is causing this problem, or is it the communication? And I wouldn't even say communication, because we have a lot of great communicators, but we don't have a lot of good marketers. And there's a big difference between communication. We can do corporate communications, we can do investors relations communications, we can do internal communications, but I'm talking about marketing, right? And I would just say politicians will stand up and show leadership, which is what we need, because we don't even have leadership. It wasn't the Prime Minister that stood up this morning. It was the Minister of Finance, right? Yep. But we have to make it easy, and they don't have the narrative to stand up and defend it.
Yeah, see, and I'm tired of making it easy for them. I'm just saying, take the mic and own it, and then just because that's the piece of, we're selling different now, right? We're selling to the consumer. We're not selling to the other investor, right? We're not like the way that we did it before when we raised capital. That's and right. Things like that. Yeah. So
those are educated people,
yeah,
right?
Right.
And they're not.
So
that's an intellectual conversation. It's an emotional conversation,
totally.
And so appeal to the emotion.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like flip the switch.
I would also add that the conversation has become such a conflict, and until we all realize that we all win when the resource sector is strong, and until we all realize that the decision on Trans Mountain is going to have a huge impact on our country and its perception around the world as a stable place to invest. You've seen a number of clean tech executives in British Columbia urge John Horgan to reverse his decision, which Bill Morneau today called unconstitutional. If we can't enforce the rule of law, get a pipeline built. Let's look again quickly at what a pipeline is. It's the safest way to transport oil. If you're opposing a pipeline, it's actually irresponsible if you want to protect the environment, because that is the safest way to transport the oil that we all use, and that has made everything in this room possible, and that will still be in demand for decades, generations to come. How long, we don't know. And the rate of technological change is obviously increasing. But if you look at previous energy transitions, these things take multi-decades, generations to happen. When the resource sector is strong, the clean tech sector is strong, when we're attracting investment in our strength, which is natural resources, aquaculture and mining and everything from coast to coast, we can then piggyback on that to bring in more investment, to bring in more economic opportunity across all sectors. Reducing emissions, the X Prize, turning carbon into other products, wind, solar, and then exporting our know-how. We are known around the world for exporting our know-how to countries all over the world to produce oil and gas to the highest possible standards and for the highest and best economic outcomes. So it's really important that we get beyond this fight, this conflict. Trans Mountain is good for the country. If you support that pipeline, polling would show you're in the majority of Canadians. And we just have to get beyond this special interest, fear-driven, know everything, narrow-minded view of the world, because the world wants what we produce. We produce it better than anywhere else, and demand is growing, and we can meet that demand.
Yeah, but we weaken our position every time those countries take our oil in, and then they laugh at us for taking oil in at a lower standard, right? And then why
absolutely.
And then the other part they laugh at us about is like, sure, keep giving me the differential. That's great. And you can't get, and that's where we just can't get our act together. And so that's great that we're the best, but we got to get our house in order, which is what any typical company does. Is you get your own house in order and then you go out. Our own house happens to be Canada, and we just can't seem to get on the same page. But we were on the same page until we let politicians and 140 characters into developing the narrative that is our sector.
Yeah, you know what? If we don't stand up for ourselves, no one else will. So for big European banks to say that they're not going to invest in Canadian energy, but they're sponsoring the OPEC conference, I mean, there's a bit of a disconnect there. And so we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to tell that story. We have to make sure that, we need to change the culture in the energy sector around communicating and being proactive. Yep. And then encourage all Canadians to understand, as an Albertan, you are a part owner of most of the oil and gas that's in the ground. And whether you live in BC, in Corner Brook or Victoria, you have benefited. And energy is life, as you were saying, Mary. So
that's exactly the bit that happened with the whole HSBC will go down as an example of Trans Mountain is going to go down as us closing our borders for investment. HSBC is going to go down as a short-sighted decision based on the fact that 140 characters was able to move you out of the energy sector, and you thought that was a good idea, and now you want back in? Yeah.
Well, I think this morning's announcement of the federal government promising some kind of indemnity to the shareholders of Kinder Morgan is exactly the highlight of the problem that we have. This is if the finance minister gets up and says that a certain political actor is behaving unconstitutionally, the answer is not, but we'll go use taxpayer money and we'll just help you. That is, if we have a huge investment problem, as Mary said, investment purgatory now, and it's not just oil and gas. Canada is really, really, I don't know of a time when our investment climate has been as bad, because we clearly can't make decisions, or when we do, we flip every time a government changes, and we can't enforce things like our Constitution. Having said that, I'm going to push Mary a little bit, because I actually think, and this is one of the reasons why I was so excited about this conference, is because it's not the same. It is not, the tone is not the same polarization. The tone is not an us and them. And I only wish the Prime Minister, who was 400 yards that way yesterday, had been able to come and actually hear some of this, because we need those policymakers to be able to say, Times are a-changing. And so when we're selling, we're not just selling life. We're not just selling lifestyle. That's fantastic. But what we also need to sell, the world is saying, we want low cost. As Steve Williams yesterday said, we want to be the last providers, we want to be providing the last barrel, but to do that we have to be low cost. But we also have to provide quality. And you might say, well, oil is oil, right? But no, a huge part of quality now is our environmental footprint. Didn't used to be, but a huge factor in how good is your oil is how environmentally sustainable it is in its extraction. The exciting thing about yesterday and today is that all of these people, no one here is disrupting their industries, no one is disrupting their businesses to pollute. We're all disrupting and encouraging disruption to actually do way better from an environmental perspective. That's the message. That's what the Prime Minister needed to hear yesterday. That's what Canadians need to hear. And so, Mary, I think we have to go further. We think we have to go further and not just sell the lifestyle because somehow we're still saying, yeah, but it's maybe not perfect. We have to sell how great this industry is becoming.
There is no question. So, I think to be perfectly clear, I'm not saying, hey, just sell lifestyle and you're done. This is a one and done thing. That is to the general public. But I completely agree with you, is that in the hierarchy of messaging, we're powering life. That's our first message. And by the way, we are the best in the world at it. And this is a center, a global center for all things energy. We are blessed in this province with an abundance of fossil fuels, an abundance of wind, an abundance of solar, and getting better and better and better, right? At it. So I agree with you. The hierarchy of messaging is, first of all, this is the business we're in. Secondly, this is how we take it so seriously. There are super, super smart people here that are, I don't want to reveal too much, but, that are turning carbon into concrete and, poop into power.
Okay, anybody on Twitter? Poop into power, hashtag even, but at the very least, that has to be one of the lines.
Well, I told
Thanks,
Mary
Mary.
there would be a few hashtags that were going to come from what she was going to say. So, but one thing I wanted to add in the same vein was around the politicians and the policymakers. I think the grit and the strength of the policymakers has been hit over the head. And they're smaller people, but they're like, forget it, no one's listening. And I think the politicians don't know how to play in their sandbox, and the policymakers are like, where's my sandbox? I thought I used to do that. And then as business, we're like, who do we talk to? Do I go and talk to the minister, or do I talk to the policymaker? Because I keep getting, blindsided by what's happening. So I think if there's some disruption to be had in the policy side, I would say policymakers, go back and own your sandbox. Why are you letting the politicians into that sandbox? Because they're only as good as what they're told. They're not educated in the sense, and they're not deep dive experts like we all are in our own industries, right? So that's what the policymaker is supposed to go do. And so get your voice back into that conversation, because as Canadian citizens, we need you to do that. We need you to do your job just the way that we do our own jobs. There's one really cool quote that kind of hangs with me for a while, and it's hung with me for quite a while. It's the former president of the European Union, and he said, you know what, we all, as politicians, know what we're supposed to do. We just don't know how to get elected after we do that. So it's like, okay, so what is this intersection of politics and democracy and business? And that is in flux. And so if we can help our own policymakers in some way in our own businesses, in our business departments, in our government relations, give them that power back and tell them to go and own it, because you've got the pen. So write the one that says, hey, let's make this a level playing field. And first off, I'm going to be the author of the one that changes those import laws.
If I can just add, that's so much of what Cody's trying to do, because the politicians, from experience, politicians do want to get reelected. Everybody wants to keep their job. So they will respond to what they believe the public opinion is. The challenge that we've had in this country, Mary, you explained very eloquently how we got to that place, but public opinion, unfortunately, in Canada now is in a place that has created a lot of these problems. And Cody, the one-man band here, has been doing an amazing job at trying to influence public opinion. He's not alone. Everybody in this room can play a part in that.
But you have to unite the voice and not be yelling in that sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
No
no
yelling,
one is
just-
listening the way
yeah.
we've been doing it.
Yeah.
So if there's anybody who's, Cody included and others, and obviously at the Calgary Chamber, we're going to take up the voice and be united around the whole power industry, energy industry. But it's one of those things is like, we got to get to a place where people are going to listen to it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we get all hands on deck, we can slowly course correct our ship. We can get going back in the right direction. We have to be aware of what our largest market and trading partner is doing on a regulatory and a policy side. We have to understand where we are today in terms of our global leadership on the environment. If you don't know where you are right now, you could never drive home. You have to know where you are to be able to arrive at your destination. The reality is you can't make a wind turbine with a wind turbine or solar panel with a solar panel. And the raw materials that we all use every day and that do come from oil, gas, and renewables, you know, it has to come, those raw materials need to come from somewhere. And I think as Canadians, we should just be proud of our positive story. It's a good news story, how we produce our resources, and we have to keep working together and just getting that positive message out there.
Yes, we do. But I'm just going to push back on this again, right? Because we do have to do this, but the reality is there are different messages for different stakeholders. And please, I beg this community to make it simple for the average person on the street.
Absolutely.
Make it easy for the person. And the person that is more sophisticated, then yes, we have to stand up united and sell and be proud of this industry because we are the best in the world, right? And then we have to influence the policymakers who understand it at a deeper level. But if we don't do that first thing and make it easy for a politician to stand up in the masses, then we will lose. Because we've been trying the other stuff for decades.
It has to be simple, it has to be
Yep.
easy to understand, and it has to be positive, fact-driven, respectful, and nonpartisan.
And disruptive.
And disruptive, absolutely.
Okay, we have a minute left. I could let you carry on, but that was a pretty perfect place to end. So first, just can we thank these great people for their thoughts, for their work, for everything that they do. And I don't know if you caught that, but pretty much all three of them were actually speaking to all of you at the last bit, right? You know, people talk about the tech sector. I keep pushing back and saying, no, there's no tech sector. There is all the incredible tech that goes into agriculture, incredible tech that goes into, and innovations that are going into forestry, incredible tech and innovative disruption that is going into the energy sector. So for all of the policy influencers that are in this room, and you, each one of you is, we need to make sure that decision makers hear you. So all three of my colleagues here and I will, you heard it, we're exhorting all of you, get out and brag about what you're doing. Get out and tell people with confidence what a great, fantastic set of things you're all doing in this sector. We need you, and the country needs you. And dare I say, the world needs you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.